I'm Heather, 27, female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, the kind with enough room for my drafting table and far too many books. As a civil engineer, my life revolves around structure, logic, and the tangible reality of steel and concrete. My brother, Mark, chose a different path. His world is one of fast deals and fleeting digital fortunes. We were never close, but our mother's passing drew a line between us that I never thought could be erased. It all started with a simple wooden box, the only thing she left me, and the day my brother's laughter filled a room that should have been silent with grief. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The lawyer's office was the color of old money, mahogany, leather, and a shade of beige that was supposed to be calming but felt suffocating. I sat stiffly in a chair that probably cost more than my first car, my black dress feeling formal and out of place. I was there to mourn, to find some closure in the final words of my mother, Carol. My brother Mark sat opposite me, not looking at our mother's long-time lawyer, David Chen, but at his watch. For him, this was a business transaction, the final closing on the mom account. He was already calculating his inheritance, the numbers ticking behind his eyes. He'd adjusted his tie 3 times in 10 minutes, a nervous tic he developed when a big commission was on the line. Mr. Chen, a kind man with gentle eyes who had known us since we were children, cleared his throat. "Thank you both for coming," he began, his voice soft with sympathy. Carol was a remarkable woman. Her final wishes were, like her, quite unique. He slid a pair of glasses onto his nose and unfolded the will, the crackle of the paper echoing in the silent room. I braced myself. I didn't expect much. Mom and I had a different kind of currency. We shared a love for creating things, for projects and plans. When I was a kid, we'd spend hours building elaborate structures out of blocks, her an architect and me her apprentice engineer. Mark, even then, was more interested in how many blocks he had, not what he could build with them. She had always supported my career choice, sending me textbooks in college and calling late at night to ask about the tensile strength of a new material I was studying. Mark's career as a sales director was a source of detached pride for her. She was happy he was successful, but she never understood his world of abstract targets and aggressive growth strategies. To my son, Mark, Mr. Chen Reed, I leave the entirety of my stock portfolio, the property on Elm Street, and the contents of my primary bank accounts. Mark's composure cracked. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. He leaned back in the expensive chair, the picture of a man who had just won the lottery. It was a fortune, easily 7 figures. It was the validation he had craved his entire life, proof that he was the successful one, the one who had made the right choices. He shot me a look, not of pity, but of pure, condescending victory. I felt a pang, not of jealousy for the money, but of sadness. It felt so transactional, so impersonal. It wasn't the mom I knew. Then Mr. Chen turned to the next page, to my daughter, Heather. He continued, his voice softening even more, as if to cushion a blow. I leave the one thing that taught me the value of patience, craftsmanship, and looking beyond the surface. I leave you my old wooden box, the one from my grandfather's workshop. Know that the greatest foundations are not always visible to the naked eye. My breath caught in my throat. The box, I remembered it vividly. It was a dark, unpolished oak box that sat on her desk for as long as I could remember. It was scuffed and plain, held together by dovetail joints she once taught me how to identify. It was, in monetary terms, worthless. A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by a sound from my brother. It started as a snort, then grew into a quiet, shaking chuckle he tried to stifle behind his hand. He couldn't hold it back. He was laughing. The sound of Mark's laughter was like shattering glass. It was sharp, cruel, and it echoed in the space where my grief had been. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He looked at me, his eyes wet with mirth, and shook his head. An old wooden box, he wheezed, as if it were the punchline to the world's greatest joke. "Oh, Heather, that is just perfect. Mom always knew you were the sentimental fool, Mr. Chen looked appalled. "Mark," he said, his tone firm, "this is hardly the time or place." But Mark was on a roll, inflated by his inheritance and my apparent humiliation. He stood up, smoothing down his designer suit. No, it's fine, David," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just. Classic mom, always with the life lessons. I get the stocks, and Heather gets a lesson in a box." He walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be a gesture of comfort, but it felt heavy and patronizing. "Don't worry, little sister," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "If you need a few bucks for rent, you can always ask. I'm feeling generous." That was it. That was the moment my sadness curdled into a cold, quiet anger. My mother was gone, and her own son was using her memory to mock me. I stood up, shrugging his hand off. "I don't need your money, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I looked at Mr. Chen. "May I have the box now?" He nodded, retrieving a simple package wrapped in brown paper from beside his desk. He handed it to me with a look of genuine sorrow. "I am so sorry, Heather, your mother. She had her reasons for everything. Please, don't be discouraged." I clutched the package to my chest. It was surprisingly heavy, solid. It felt real, more real than the abstract numbers in a bank account that had made my brother so gleeful. Mark was already at the door, pulling out his phone, probably to call his broker or a real estate agent. "Well, I've got to run," he announced to the room. "Big things happening. Let me know what you find in there, Heather. Maybe there's an old sandwich inside." He laughed again and walked out, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of the office, holding my ridiculous, worthless, and now deeply infuriating inheritance. The drive home was a blur. I put the box on the passenger seat, still in its brown paper wrapping. Every time I stopped at a red light, I'd look at it. What was Mom thinking? Was Mark right? Was this some final, misguided lesson about the evils of materialism? It felt cruel. She knew I was practical. I didn't need a fortune, but I was still paying off student loans, and my job, while stable, wasn't making me rich. A small inheritance would have been a safety net, a bit of breathing room. An old box was an anchor. Back in my apartment, I tore off the paper. There it was, the oak box. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of a dark, rich wood. The corners were worn smooth from decades of handling. There was no visible lock, no hinges, just incredibly fine seams where the lid met the base. I ran my fingers over the dovetail joints, a hallmark of true craftsmanship. It was beautiful in its simplicity, in its structural integrity. My anger began to subside, replaced by a familiar curiosity. Mom's last words from the will echoed in my head, looking beyond the surface. She wasn't just talking about the box. She was talking about everything, about Mark, about money, and about me. Holding the box, I felt a flicker of the old connection, the quiet understanding that had always existed between us. Mark could have his money, I had a puzzle, and if I knew my mother, the prize for solving it would be worth far more than he could ever comprehend. For 3 days, the box sat on my coffee table, a silent challenge. I'd walk past it, run my hand over its surface, and try to will it open. Mark called once, his voice oozing fake concern. "Hey, just checking in. Figured out the magic words to open your treasure chest yet? Is it please or abracadabra?" I told him I was busy and hung up before he could say more. His mockery was a fuel, pushing me to solve the puzzle not just for myself, but to prove him and my own doubts wrong. On the 4th night, I decided to approach it like an engineering problem. I wasn't looking for a keyhole or a latch anymore. I was looking for a mechanism. I took out my calipers, a notepad, and a bright desk lamp. I measured every inch of it, mapping its dimensions, noting the grain of the wood, the almost invisible variations in the seams. My mother had been an architect, but her father had been a master carpenter. She understood wood, how it swelled and settled, how it could be used to create secrets. The box wasn't just wood, it was a machine. I noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible discoloration on one of the side panels. It was a knot in the wood, but it was smoother than the rest of the surface. On a hunch, I pressed it. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder. Still nothing. Frustrated, I remembered something Mom used to say while we were building our block towers. Every structure has a key piece, not a key, a piece, the one that holds the rest together. I thought about the box's structure. I pushed the knot again, but this time I simultaneously slid the top panel to the left. There was a soft click. My heart leaped. A section of the lid, no bigger than a credit card, had shifted, revealing a small, carved indentation. It wasn't a button, but a track. Following it with my finger, I found another panel that now had a slight give to it. A sequence. It was a puzzle box. It took another hour of pushing, sliding, and turning the box in a precise sequence. It was a complex, beautiful mechanism. Each step unlocked the next, a symphony of woodwork and hidden pins. I could almost hear my mother's voice, guiding me, reminding me to be patient, to observe. Finally, with a deep, satisfying thunk, the main lid slid free. I held my breath, half expecting it to be empty, a final, cruel joke. It wasn't. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet lay not gold or jewels, but a collection of strange, seemingly random objects. There was an old brass compass, the kind sailors used, its needle frozen in place. On top of it lay a single ornate silver key, tarnished with age. Beside that was a small bundle of letters, at least a dozen of them, tied together with a faded blue silk ribbon, and underneath it all was a large, rolled-up document, secured with another ribbon. It looked like a blueprint. I gently lifted the contents out. The objects felt heavy with history and intention. I picked up the compass first. It was broken, useless for navigation. But as I turned it over in my hands, I saw something. Scratched delicately into the brass on the underside was a set of coordinates. My mind raced. This was more than a collection of mementos. This was a map. I carefully untied the ribbon on the letters. The top one was in my mother's elegant, familiar script. The date was from 10 years ago. It began, "My dearest Heather, if you are reading this, it means you have opened the box, and you have already proven that you have the most important tool I could ever give you, a patient and observant mind. Your journey is just beginning." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet obsession. I took time off work, telling my boss I needed to handle family matters, which was technically true. My apartment transformed into an investigation headquarters. The puzzle box sat in the center of my dining table, its contents fanned out around it like evidence in a case. Mark had left a couple more smug voicemails, which I deleted without listening to. He was irrelevant now. I was in a conversation with my mother, a dialogue that stretched across time. I started with the letters. There were 15 in total, each one written on her birthday for the past 15 years and never sent. They weren't just letters. They were a chronicle of her thoughts, her hopes for me, and cleverly hidden clues. She wrote about our trips to the coast, referencing specific tide pools and rock formations. She reminisced about helping me with a school project on bridge design, mentioning the importance of a keystone. Each memory was tied to a lesson, and each lesson was a piece of the puzzle. "Remember the old stone wall on grandfather's property, Heather," one letter read. "Everyone thought it was just a wall, but you were the one who found the loose stone where we'd hide our treasures. Some things of value are hidden in plain sight." The compass was the first tangible step. The coordinates it pointed to were for a location about an hour outside the city. I plugged them into my car's GPS and drove out one sunny morning. The directions led me down a series of winding country roads until the GPS finally announced, "You have arrived." I was in front of a 5-acre plot of undeveloped land. It was beautiful, dotted with old-growth trees and a small stream running through it. A simple, weathered-for-sale sign stood near the road, but upon closer inspection, a sold banner had been slapped across it. There was no indication of who had bought it. It seemed like a dead end until I remembered the letter about things of value hidden in plain sight. I got out of the car and walked the perimeter of the property. Tucked away, almost consumed by a climbing ivy on an old fence post, was a small, weather-proof lockbox, the kind real estate agents use. It was old and rusted, and it had a keyhole that looked suspiciously familiar. My heart hammered against my ribs as I drove home. I retrieved the tarnished silver key from the wooden box. It was a long shot, but the feeling in my gut was undeniable. The next day, I drove back to the property. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lockbox. It resisted for a moment, then turned with a rusty groan. The front of the box fell open. Inside was another key, this one modern, and a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the land deed. The property had been purchased 2 years ago by a holding company I'd never heard of. This had to be my mother's doing. The final piece was the rolled-up blueprint from the box. I'd saved it for last, knowing it would be significant. I carefully unrolled it on my drafting table. It wasn't a blueprint, it was an architectural drawing, and the style was unmistakably my mother's. It detailed a modest but beautiful 2-story building. It had large windows, open, concept workspaces, and a design that integrated seamlessly with the natural landscape. It was labeled the Artisans Collective. It was a design for a community workshop, a place for creators and builders. In the bottom right corner, in the box for the location, were the exact coordinates scratched into the bottom of the compass. She had designed a building for this specific plot of land. Everything was connected. The letters were the emotional map. The compass gave the location, the silver key unlocked the deed, and the blueprint revealed the purpose. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a project. It was a legacy waiting to be built. The new key from the lockbox on the property was a standard safety deposit box key. It had a number etched into it, but no bank name. This was the next hurdle. How could I find the right bank? I went back to the letters, poring over them again, this time looking for financial clues. In a letter dated 5 years ago, my mother wrote about fiscal responsibility. Mark sees money as something to be spent, she wrote. But I've always believed true wealth is something to be invested, not in the market, but in people, in community. The best returns aren't measured in dollars, but in growth. At the bottom of the page, almost like a doodle, was a small sketch of a lion. A lion, it clicked instantly, the logo for First Fidelity Bank, the institution my grandfather had used his entire life, was a lion's head. It was the bank right downtown, the one with the big stone lions out front. The next morning, I walked into the grand lobby of First Fidelity, the modern key feeling warm in my hand. After a short, nerve-wracking conversation with the bank manager, I was led down to the vault. The attendant used his key, then I used mine, and a long metal box slid out. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no cash, no gold bars, no jewelry. It was filled with documents. On top was a thick envelope with my name on it, written in my mother's hand. I opened it and read, "My dear Heather." The letter began. "If you are reading this, you have solved my last puzzle. I am so proud of you. I need you to understand why I did things this way. Your brother is a good man in his heart, but he is blinded by the pursuit of wealth. Had I left him a large sum of cash, it would have been gone in a few years on a faster car, a bigger house, a more extravagant vacation. It would have been consumed, leaving nothing behind. You, however, you are a builder. You understand that true value lies in creating something that lasts, something that serves a purpose beyond itself." My eyes filled with tears as I continued to read. She explained everything. The holding company that bought the land was hers, created to keep the purchase anonymous. The safety deposit box contained the original deeds, now legally transferred to my name. But there was more. Beneath the deeds were account statements for a trust fund. Over the last 5 years of her life, my mother had been systematically liquidating parts of her portfolio, the very stocks she had ostensibly left to Mark, and funneling the money into this trust. It was an astonishing amount, far more than I could have imagined. It was seed money, enough to fund the entire construction of the Artisans Collective and establish an endowment to keep it running for years to come. She had legally structured it so that the bulk of her liquid wealth was funneled into this trust before her passing. The stocks she left Mark were only what remained. He thought he'd received the lion's share, but in reality, he'd received the leftovers. The true inheritance, the vast majority of her fortune, was here, in this box, entrusted to me. But it wasn't for me to spend, it was for me to build. The final line of her letter made me choke back a sob. "He got the money, my love, but I left you the legacy. Go and build our dream. The wooden box wasn't the inheritance, it was the key to it. It was a test of character, a filter to ensure her life's work ended up in the right hands." Mark, with his scorn and impatience, would never have even opened it. He would have thrown it in the trash, she knew it. She had trusted that I, the sentimental fool, would see what he could not, that the greatest treasures require a little work to unlock. 2 months passed. I had thrown myself into the project, consulting with Mr. Chen to navigate the legalities of the trust and hiring a surveyor for the land. I was living and breathing my mother's vision, using my engineering skills to refine her architectural drawings, making sure her dream could become a structurally sound reality. I had never felt more alive, more purposeful. The grief for my mother was still there, but now it was interwoven with a profound sense of connection to her. Then, inevitably, the phone call came. It was Mark. His voice was strained, the usual arrogant swagger completely gone. "Heather, we need to talk." He asked to meet me for coffee. It was the first time he had ever initiated a meeting that wasn't a family command performance. We met at a neutral cafe downtown. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit looked rumpled. He had lost the smug sheen of victory he'd worn at the lawyer's office. He stumbled through small talk before getting to the point. "Look, I'm in a bit of a bind," he admitted, stirring his coffee so vigorously it sloshed over the side. "I made a few aggressive investments. I was counting on a bit more liquidity from Mom's estate. The brokerages have issued a margin call. I'm over-leveraged." I just listened, my expression neutral. "The thing is," he continued, unable to meet my eyes, "that silly plot of land Mom left you. It's just sitting there. It's actually in a decent area for development. If you sell it, it could fetch a pretty penny. I've already talked to a guy who would pay top dollar." He finally looked at me, a desperate, hungry gleam in his eyes. If you sell it and loan me the money, I can cover my position and pay you back with interest. It's a win-win. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch.
No, I said simply. Mark blinked, stunned. What do you mean, no? Heather, it's just a patch of dirt. I'm your brother. I'm in real trouble here. His voice was rising, attracting glances from other patrons.
It's not just a patch of dirt, Mark, I said, my voice calm and even. It's the future site of the Carol Vance Artisans Collective. His face contorted in confusion. The what? What are you talking about? And so I told him. I told him everything. I told him about the puzzle box he'd mocked. I told him about the coordinates on the compass, the key in the lockbox, the letters, and the blueprints. I told him about the safety deposit box and the trust fund. I told him how Mom had spent the last 5 years of her life carefully converting the bulk of her wealth into a legacy, a project that would help people create and build things for generations to come. I watched as the sequence of emotions played out across his face, confusion, followed by disbelief, then dawning comprehension, and finally, a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated fury. She hid it, he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. She hid the money from me. No, Mark. I corrected him gently. She didn't hide the money from you. She invested it. She entrusted it to the person she knew would understand its real value. He stared at me, his face pale. The full scope of it was finally hitting him. He hadn't won. He had been given a consolation prize. The sentimental fool, sister with her wooden box, was the one who had received the true inheritance. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. So you're not going to help me, he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. I can't. I replied honestly. The money is in a trust. It can only be used for the project. That was her design. He stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched against the floor. He looked at me with a hatred so profound it was startling. He saw me not as his sister, but as the architect of his ruin. You'll regret this, he snarled, before turning and storming out of the cafe, leaving me with the bill. But I knew I wouldn't. For the first time, the foundation of my life felt absolutely unshakable. A year can change everything. The plot of land that Mark had called a patch of dirt was now a bustling construction site. I had resigned from my corporate engineering job to oversee the project full-time, becoming the director of a foundation I never knew I was meant to lead. Every day I was on site, wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots, my mother's blueprints in hand. I worked with the contractors, solved logistical problems, and used every bit of my training to ensure that the building rising from the earth was worthy of her vision. The structure was beautiful, all clean lines, natural light, and sustainable materials. It was a perfect fusion of her architectural grace and my engineering pragmatism. Mark and I didn't speak again. I heard through the grapevine that he had been forced to sell his luxury condo and his flashy car. His aggressive investments had collapsed, and without the massive cash infusion he'd been expecting, his high-flying world had crumbled. He had to take a lower-level sales job at a smaller company, his pride shattered. He had been given every material advantage, but he had built his life on a foundation of sand. When the tide went out, there was nothing left. I felt a sliver of pity for him, but it was overshadowed by a deep sense of rightness. My mother had known. She had seen the structural flaws in his character long before they became catastrophic. The day the foundation for the main workshop was poured was a milestone. I stood on the edge of the excavation, watching as the concrete flowed into the rebar and forced forms. It was the literal and metaphorical foundation of a new chapter in my life. I was not just building a structure, I was building a community. We had already started accepting applications for the first round of resident artisans, woodworkers, potters, glassblowers, and weavers. The building wasn't even finished, and already her dream was taking on a life of its own. My old wooden box now sits on my desk in the small site office, its lid slightly ajar. Sometimes, when I'm facing a particularly challenging problem, I run my hand over its smooth, worn surface. It's a constant reminder that the most valuable things are rarely what they seem on the surface. They don't glitter or boast. They are quiet, solid, and built to last. Mark got an inheritance that could be spent. I was given one that had to be built, and I finally understood that my mother, in her infinite wisdom, had given each of us exactly what we deserved. He was left with shrinking numbers on a screen, while I was surrounded by the tangible, hopeful, and enduring reality of a dream taking shape, one solid piece at a time.